All of a sudden, on February the 1st, what happened?
And she said she couldn't swallow. Well, at that point, I noticed her fingers were blue and her toes were blue, and she was starting to breathe real heavy.
We all began to get hypersensitive to noises, sounds, jumpy lights. I'd see things sort of flash by. I began to think, is somebody trying to send me a message that I shouldn't be doing this film?
Steven Spielberg could be responsible for a curse that all started with a movie. His series Poltergeist has claimed the lives of several actors, including a 12-year-old actress named Heather O'Rourke. We're going to unpack this curse and the possible reality behind it, so let's get into it. We all know Steven Spielberg. He's made quite a name for himself in Hollywood with his horror movies, but there is a curse that has been following him, and it's associated with his Poltergeist films. Let me give you guys an example. We're going to be talking about Heather O'Rourke, who lost her life at the age of 12. Now, Heather was born on December 27th in 1975. Heather got into the acting business at a young age because her sister, who was 4 years older than her, was already an actress. Heather went on to star in 2 Poltergeist sequels. In 1987, she filmed Poltergeist 3 in Chicago, wrapping up her time on set that June. She was looking forward to the film's release, telling people at the time, "This one is really good. I think it's the best." But unfortunately for little old Heather, she never got to see the premiere of Poltergeist 3. So the 1980s classic became known as Hollywood's most cursed film following the 12-year-old actress's death. There's been superstition following the movie because there's been a handful of mysterious cast deaths. So when it came back in 2015, actors were hesitant to go on to this film because so many other actors have passed away in bizarre ways. The Poltergeist curse came about after 4 of the cast members died of mysterious circumstances, the most shocking being of that of Heather O'Rourke, who was 12 years old at the time, and she played Carol Ann in all 3 films. Let me give you guys some context about the Poltergeist movies if you haven't seen them before. Set in a house built on ancient Native American burial grounds, the original Poltergeist trilogy told the terrifying story of the Freeling family and their encounters with the supernatural. Many believe the Poltergeist curse began the same year the first movie was released. But it wasn't until the 3rd movie came around where people really believed there was a curse here because of how Heather passed away. She was a fan favorite in the films, and there was a line she was known for where she says, "They're here," in a creepy way. Let's talk about how Heather O'Rourke passed away. In 1988, she died from a bowel obstruction that her doctors had previously dismissed as Crohn's disease. Her cause of death was listed as intestinal cyanosis, a congenital condition that had gone undetected since her birth. She died on the operating table at the Children's Hospital of San Diego while surgeons attempted to remove a severe bowel obstruction which caused septic shock. Oh, that sounds so painful. I just, anyone who goes through this, sending good vibes to you because that sounds really, really terrible. Her mother said it was intestinal blockage that had probably been present since birth. She continued, the x-rays taken, if read properly, would have disclosed that this was the kind of condition that should have been treated surgically. Unfortunately, Heather's doctors had misdiagnosed her a year prior, an oversight that cost the young girl her life. In January 1987, Heather began showing signs of illness. It started out small. She felt nauseous at home with her family. Her family took her to the hospital about 3 or 4 times that month, and they kept telling her that she had the flu.
She'd had a parasite, and she was in Kaiser Hospital for several tests, and before they even admitted her, they said she just had the flu, but she was sick for a month, and then they found she had a parasite, and at that point after that, she had gone back in, they said she had Crohn's, and so we just accepted it, and then she was on cortisone.
Crohn's was how they diagnosed
Yes,
the
it was. And she was on cortisone all this time, and you'll see in Poltergeist 3, her kind of heavy chipmunk cheeks, which she didn't like how that looked,
Swelled her up a little bit.
Oh, yeah.
Now, you have your lawyer with you,
Yes.
Sandy Gage. Your position is that there was a bad diagnosis and the problem could have been...
Yes, it could have been avoided. The diagnosis was really one of an inflammation of the bowel.
Crohn's is an intense disease. It's like an autoimmune disease. And I actually know people who have had or who have this. I don't think it necessarily goes away. And it's not easy to live with when you have a flare-up. But once Heather's feet began to swell, it was clear that she was not suffering from a simple virus. Eventually, doctors discovered that she had a parasitic infection that was caused by well water at their home. They prescribed her medication to kill this parasite, which also sounds terrible, and supposedly it worked. At least they thought so, but Kathleen wanted to be sure, so they gave her a follow-up visit before the Poltergeist 3 began. Kathleen, Heather's mother, wanted to be sure that she was okay, so she took her to the doctors one more time before they began production for Poltergeist 3. She said they did an x-ray after giving her this chalky white barium stuff to drink, and they found that the parasite was cleared up, but there was still kind of like some inflammation. They called what they saw Crohn's, and they put her on cortisone and sulfa. Now everything was all right. It wasn't perfect, but it was all right until Heather got sick again. It was January 31st, 1988 when Heather came down with flu-like symptoms. She began vomiting and had abdominal pain. The next day, her fingers and toes started turning blue and her stomach looked swollen. On the morning of February 1st, she collapsed and her parents immediately called 911. It took EMTs only 10 minutes to get Heather to the hospital, but by that time, she was going into cardiac arrest at 12 years old, which must have been really tragic for her and her parents to watch their young daughter in so much pain and no one can figure out what's wrong.
While there were some flu symptoms and some swelling, everything was treated fairly carefully, and all of a sudden, on February the 1st, what happened?
On February 1st, she had been sick for a year. And on Super Bowl Sunday, we were watching the football game, and she started to throw up. And about every 2 hours, things would come back up again, so we gave her Gatorade. And
Gatorade is what your doctors told
yes,
her? Yes,
they suggested that because it does have protein in it. It's better than the flat Coke. And the next morning, we woke up, and she said she was going to school. I said, you can't go to school because you haven't eaten anything. She said, well, how about some toast? So I made her some toast, and I sat down by her on the couch, and she said she couldn't swallow. Well, at that point, I noticed her fingers were blue, and her toes were blue, and she was starting to breathe real heavy. And I immediately went to the phone and just called the local clinic nearby, and they said, bring her right in, and within a matter of 20, 30 seconds, she went to get dressed, and she fell on the floor.
Despite going into cardiac arrest, Heather was able to be revived on the operating table where they realized what was really going on with her. They were able to correct it, but unfortunately it was too late because her body had gone into septic shock, which is so scary to me. I don't know much about like medical conditions, but like, isn't septic shock when your body's like kind of like poisoned itself? Like your blood is almost like toxic. Like, again, I don't know. So comment below. I know you're going to correct me, but her heart stopped beating once again on the operating table. And this time, doctors weren't able to bring her back. In the wake of her daughter's death, Kathleen filed a wrongful death lawsuit against her doctors. She felt like this could have been prevented. She was taking her daughter to the doctors so often, so she doesn't understand why they couldn't figure this out. And it's just a really unfortunate situation.
You're suing because you are not satisfied that what happened, that maybe it might not have happened.
Right.
On that day, they tried some measures to bring her back, and they did a surgery which demonstrated that there had been an erroneous diagnosis, that it was a blocked intestine, and it's pretty clear that that surgery could have been done and should have been done almost a year sooner, and if that had occurred, that simple procedure would have saved her life.
Well, we did talk to the Permanente Medical Group, part of Kaiser, and they released a statement to us which says this is a very tragic case for all concerned. It's also extremely complex case, complicated by a number of factors, not given to simple answers. We have reviewed the case extensively. We are confident that the course of action taken by our doctors was entirely appropriate. That's their statement.
Heather's family believe that her death could have been avoided if the doctors had diagnosed her correctly, which I feel like this probably happens way more often than we talk about, where doctors misdiagnose people, they don't get better, they get sicker. Doctors could, I love doctors. We stand doctors on this channel, but, doctors are people too. Kind of like police are. There are good ones, there are bad ones. So I feel like, this happens, and it's sad and scary because it's like you never know when your body's going to go into something or have a reaction and you don't know how to fix it, and the doctors, they don't know how to fix it. I mean, they only know so much. So yeah, Kathleen argued that this could have been avoided, so she wanted to sue them for it. Either way, it wasn't going to bring Heather back. One person was quoted saying Heather was just a sweetheart and shy and beautiful. She was just this wonderful little girl and she was perfect for the role. She was so sweet and easy to work with, and she just took my hand the first day and held on to me for the rest of the time. And if I would cry, she would cry. If I would scream, she would scream. Here's this 5-year-old girl who had this innate empathy. She was truly a gifted little actress.
Unlike her character, Heather O'Rourke wasn't fazed by the movie's eerie plot.
I cried in a scene, she would cry. If I seemed scared in a scene, she would totally take her cue off me and she would become scared. To the point where I began to get worried, and I said, you know, Heather, I'm just acting. She said, I know, so am I. And I went, oh, okay. I'll just back off.
Everyone who worked with Heather enjoyed her. She was a sweet little actress who knew what she was doing, and she never complained. But I want to talk a little bit more about these movies. So there are some theories that this movie, Poltergeist, is cursed. There are some creepy things that happened during filming. Steven Spielberg used real dead bodies, and more than one actor passed away. People actually link this curse to Heather's death. Even though it's very, medical, they still believe that maybe the curse or something along those lines is what led to her actually passing. And when it comes to Native Americans and all of that, I do not like messing with it. They should have their land. We need to respect them. We love our Native American people. So films like this, they really just get to me. Even the remake has had some paranormal activity, according to people who worked on set, but original stars like Dominique is an actress who was on the film, and she also experienced some paranormal things.
As life on set became more difficult, life at home became more bizarre.
Dominique had a weird experience while she was making the movie. Soon after the production started on the film, she was staying in the house. A bookshelf falls over, throws books all over the room that was bolted into the wall.
I was living in an apartment in LA because I was from New York, and I would come home every evening, and the pictures in the apartment would be crooked, and I would straighten them, and I would go to bed, and I'd get up really early and go to work the next day. And I'd come home late at night after a long, exhausting day, and the pictures would be crooked again. And I began to get very creeped out about this. I began to think, is somebody trying to send me a message that I shouldn't be doing this film?
That is so creepy to think about. I'm over here checking my plaques, are we okay? Everything's straight, right? I don't want anything turned crooked. Jo Beth Williams, an actress in the film, was quoted saying, I always assumed that the skeletons were made by the prop department. A few years later, I ran into one of the special effects guys and I said, you guys making all those skeletons, that must have been really amazing. And he said, oh, we didn't make them. Those were real. They were real skeletons that these people were playing around with and acting with, which I feel like that's against some laws. Aren't there laws that protect the remains? I don't know. I've listened to too many crime podcasts. Joy Beth said, I don't know where they bought them from, but that really grossed me out. I'm glad I didn't know that then, because I would have been screaming a lot for real. That scene is so disgusting, and she agrees. She said it was really awful. First of all, they made the mud with peat, and peat begins to really stink after about a day. It begins to smell like dog poop, so it was really icky to be in, she says. She said I'd have to scream, and I'd think, oh God, I don't want to get this water in my mouth because I'm sure I'd get a terrible disease. Ew. It seems like the cast didn't have an easy time working with Steven Spielberg. I mean, doing all of these really intense scenes, you would think that maybe the director would help comfort them a little bit. One actor shared that it was terrible on set. They made this tree and put thorns in it. It was crazy. He said it was a rubber tree, but at the same time, you're climbing up there and you're going, why? Why did the tree need to have thorns on it? I mean, couldn't you make it a little bit more comfortable or safe? Jo Beth shared that the poor cameraman had to ride this Ferris wheel device. He was strapped in, and there were people helping him, and even though he had some assistance, he was in a lot of pain, and I guess at one point his elbows were bleeding. He yelled down to his boss Steven, telling him that his elbows were bleeding, and Steven said, that's all right, we could just wipe off the blood, it'll never show. So Steven never really took them seriously and just tried to power through these films.
All began to get hypersensitive to noises, sounds, jumpy lights, I'd see things sort of flash by. And I think people were more susceptible to being creeped out because of the material that we were dealing with. You know, when you sort of have to put yourself, especially as actors, in a state of terror all the time.
It has to be difficult to kind of put yourself in that character. And we see so many people do method acting. I mean, imagine doing method acting when you're dealing with like Native American supernatural possessed things that may also trickle out into your real life. It's horrific, but I hope you guys enjoyed this video. It was an interesting one, huh? Interesting, but highly requested, believe it or not. And I'll see you guys in a new video soon. Bye, guys.